thanks so much for watching the Sullivan's Project's mid-month review for the, this is going to be Spacefest, actually, part 2. And thanks so much for watching. This place really turns alive at night for all of us night owls and astronomy crazies. They have a telescope here that's really cool. We're going to show you here in a second. And we're going to take you on to part 2. In part 2, we'll actually take you through the astronauts ahead of time as far as some of the guest speakers. Amy Shira Titel. Just look for ASV or AST underscore vintage space on Twitter and find her. She also has a really good Facebook page under it's going to be vintage space. Just look for that vintage space on Facebook. This is a wonderful place here, and it's the Patterson Observatory at the university. And about every month or so, the Huachuca Astronomy Club, which I joined this year and really enjoyed, has an open house here, so that's what we're here to see. Hey there.
Hey.
What's the diameter of that the telescope right there?
Inch.
Is it 20 inch? Okay.
Yeah, 4.45.
I'm telling all my friends at Spacefest so about this.
Cool.
Tell them to get out of here.
You gonna film it?
Not the whole thing, just from here. Well, I still have light.
All right.
Isn't that really great? This is actually controlled by a gyro run from a computer right
From
here.
that computer, yeah.
And I saw the software last month, and it's really awesome. Because they like to keep the lights out at night, except for the red lights, like what you see in airplanes, 747s to Cessnas during night, not to destroy night vision. They don't have real joy for lighting up.
No, I just went to a star party a couple months ago with my girlfriend in Texas, and then I moved.
What this does, right now it's pointed at the moon. See? Well, not really. I've been a tech guess, say it's probably going to be Jupiter. Really great place.
But and then I went out and I got these binoculars, you know, and like a monopod for them.
They were outside last week, so I walked over there. I said, okay, I know
Well, thanks very much for watching the Sullivan's Project's Spacefest 8 2017 special. This is a guy I've wanted to meet for a long time, Air Force General Joe Engle. I knew him from friends out at Dryden, Bill Dana and others who had flown with him in the X-15 project. And this is just, it's a wonderful little Mach 6 aircraft that actually makes it into space. And it often gets confused with the $6 million man. That's actually a different shape, but same principle. This is Joe going into the X-15. Now this B-52 is the one at Dryden right now. It's NB008. Actually, there's one just like it. It's a little bit earlier, actually, NB003 in Tucson, which also launch these lifting bodies in X-15s. And for the X-15, they actually had to cut out the back wing of the craft. I'm not really sure you can see it there, but yeah, they had to cut out the back wing to make room for the tail of the X-15. That's the XLR 99. Started out with 411s, but that's the XLR 99. Very powerful rocket. And I think Scott Crossfield was testing it in the North American test program, and it blew up on the pad, but somehow he managed to live, being thrown several dozen feet forward after the canopy separated. And there's MB-008 making his climb out from Edwards. This thing actually goes out all the way out to Utah before it launches, and then the suborbital flight takes place from there. And the X-15 will be on the ground much before the B-52 will. I think they launched at about 45,000 feet, and those are gases you see venting from the fuel source and the helium and hydrogen. If you ever get out to the Pima Air Museum, you can see all the labels they have on that thing. And there's the launch of Joe Engle in the X-15, and he lights up the XLR 99, and next thing you know, he's going to space. They had 199 flights in this program. I know Major Mike Adams died in one of them, and quite a few of them had to get repaired after minor crashes. And there's the atmosphere in space heading back from Utah out down the range out to Dryden Rogers Lake bed, which is also where the early shuttles and the lifting body project also landed at. Just amazing footage. He's from Chapman, Kansas, and it's a real joy after talking with him by electronic or paper communications after all this time to actually get a chance to meet him. It's been a real pleasure to do that. He was actually selected for Apollo 17, and when they bumped him for a real scientist instead of a real pilot, he went out to fly this and the shuttle program. He did something very similar to this in Flight 2 of the shuttle Enterprise, which I'll show you later, as well as he also commanded a real mission out to space in the shuttle. Just a wonderful little program. Landed on skids with a nose wheel. I'm very glad Spacefest has featured the X-15 this year in their projects. There he is pulling himself out of the X-15 and making his way back to the NASA trailer. I'm doing all these videos chronologically as they happen, so now we're going to go on to the Apollo program. Now, I decided editorially to leave out Gemini, but a lot of these pilots and astronauts that are here this year actually were in the Apollo program as well as the Gemini program. There goes Apollo 7, the first manned launch with Walter Cunningham aboard after the tragic loss of Apollo 1 on the launch pad. So they had to go redesign the capsule. The LEM was far behind, so they decided just to go ahead and check out the capsule and see if it actually worked in space like they thought it would after the safety refinements after the loss of Apollo 1. And so this is the first manned launch with Walter Cunningham aboard. This one here got a lot of crazy press attention, even now on YouTube, about some kind of mutiny or whatever. Walter Cunningham, I asked him about this last year, and he said emphatically No, that's just all press, being press. I think back in the 1960s they invented fake news. He's a really nice guy. Him and his wife Dottie are just wonderful, wonderful people. And if you ever get a chance to meet him, please do. Following on with the Gemini program, they actually constructed this device that could practice rendezvous and dockings with. The Apollo, they redesigned Apollo capsule was much, much roomier compared to the Gemini or even the Mercury before that. And it's so sad we lost our last Mercury astronaut this year, John Glenn. I had a chance to meet 4 of them, and all 4 of them were really great. But you can see they had a lot more complexity in the consoles after the redesign. And I still think they said as sophisticated as the Apollo computer was, just more computing power in your Android or iPhone. But what a great guy he is. Please get down and just shake his hand and meet him and his wife. He's just really a great guy. The first Apollo astronaut. Here they are on splashdown. Those little inflatable balloons you see up there are to right the craft in case it lands upside down, which it did a couple times in the program. Go Navy. HS5. Next up, they finally got the LIM ready to test in space. And so here is Apollo 9 with Dave Scott and another astronaut, Jim McDevitt. Both of these astronauts will be here at Spacefest. This was the first space launch of the Lunar Excursion Module, the thing that landed on the moon. And once a different contractor than the one that built the command module finally got that thing finished and ready to go, they had to test it out. And so they put it up in space and went through the simulation of what they would do around the moon. Because it was late, Apollo 8 had already been to the moon just to see navigation-wise if it was possible and what kind of problems they would have. And as we see in history, it worked out great with Jim Lovell and his crewmates aboard. And so this is not actually the docking ring you see here. This is what you see on everything from here on out through the Space Shuttle Program and the International Space Station. It's a kind of a guide. And we have a hard, solid dock, good dock. And so they go play around in the LIM for a while. And they do toss it down into the atmosphere, and here's the command module coming back with a whole lot of smoke and flames. This was not even near as fast as the ones coming back from the moon, but it's still pretty hot. There's your 3 mains coming out, we think anyway. I see 1, I see 2, I see 3. Both the Apollo program and the Orion and CST programs to follow have the capability to land just fine on 2 chutes in case one fails. Next up, we're going to skip Apollo 10 because we lost the Apollo 10, Apollo 17 astronauts this year, Gene Cernan. But the most famous part of this, if you ever listen to the audio, is Charlie Zook at Mission Control in Houston making calls back out to Neil after he had announced that the Eagle had landed. He said, "You got a bunch of guys turning blue down here." It's just, what a great guy. And I'm so grateful that he prayed for me last year when I found out I had cancer. And so Michael Collins actually stayed in orbit, and I think he had the best seat because everything looks good from up there. And he was the first one to go solo around the backside of the moon, completely out of contact, radio signals, and just completely isolated from the rest of humanity. And he got a lot of great pictures. they actually orbited pretty close to the equator on all the landings. And so when the command module went in orbit, they circled a lot of the moon and got a lot of great pictures, but they really didn't see that much of it. That was fixed when the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter went up a couple years ago, and they've taken some fantastic pictures in a polar orbit. It takes about 2 weeks to get it all the way through the moon, and they can also see changes. What a sad thing. I heard that Alan Bean's not going to be here this year. Alan Bean was one of the moonwalkers that went with Richard Gordon, and just a really great guy. And here they are lighting up on a mission that will get them struck by lightning. They actually lost all power in the command module on the way up, and just turned out this one engineer had seen this kind of problem before, so he made a recommendation, called it up to the ship. They flipped a switch and it worked, and everything came back on. There's Alan Bean right there. What happened was after they landed on the moon, they somehow got the camera pointed into the sun, and it blew out the transducers or whatever they were using at the time, the tubes, whatever, in the cameras. I think there were West Air cameras that Robert Brand worked on, and they didn't have video on the surface of the moon the rest of the mission. But in order to make up for that, they took a lot of great pictures, and Alan Bean, before he went to Skylab 3 for his last flight, had actually become quite an accomplished artist who recreated what he had seen on the moon, with high fidelity, and just a great guy. I really enjoyed singing happy birthday to his wife last summer, and I'm so sad to hear he's not going to make it this year. Richard Gordon is going to be kind of lonely without him, because every time I've been to Spacefest and seen these two, they've always been together and they're best friends. They went to the moon together, and their friendship and camaraderie, that's more than just being on the same crew. It lasts till this day. If you ever get to see Richard Gordon, please shake his hand and tell him hi, because he's a great guy. And here's Apollo 12. They came pretty close to landing on their side, but at the last minute they picked a great spot and put it down. Everybody talks about how great this Elon Musk guy is for putting a stage 1 back on the pad, but I'll tell you what, that's nothing compared to hitting this at 238,000 miles away on a dime. As I said, here is the landing of Apollo 12. And at the same time, Richard stayed in orbit, just like Michael Collins did back on 11. But he was a really good photographer, and most of these guys were up in the command module, and he actually spotted the limb down there on the surface, and that's that little thing you see in there. And since then, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has gotten some really good pictures, including moon boots and all the tracks of the rover, everything. So they can still see the bottom stage of the limb still sitting there, and probably the flags too. But really some great photography that these guys caught. Apollo 12 actually had a very geologically unique area, like 13 did. 13 actually turned into 14 because 13 didn't make it down, but so 14 landed where 13 was supposed to. And there's the flag. There's 6 of those on the moon right now, and as far as I can guess, maybe China or Russia has a couple little ones attached to the side of a craft, but that's what an accomplishment this was. And as the missions got longer and more things were done and technology was better and the cameras got better, what's interesting to me is that the interest in the Apollo program started to go down a little bit as far as the American attention span, which is kind of sad because 11 was like a 2-hour nothingness compared to what these guys were doing on 12, 15, 16, and 17. And there's the crew back up on the moon's orbit with Richard, and very shortly they're going to send this thing back down. And 10 was the only one that didn't crash into the surface. Well, 13 I guess as well. But there it goes. It's on its way down, and one thing they left on the moon was a seismometer that sent radio signals back to Earth to one of the universities. And you're going to see what happens here when it hits. There's Dick Slayton. There you go. That's Columbia University was the university involved in this, and it's amazing how long that shockwave lasted. I guess there's a lot of bounce of the moon, and there was almost an eclipse. You see in the crescent Earth, and there's Apollo 12 back on Earth with the United States Navy, another HS squadron pulling them down. And here's those 2 good friends I'm talking about, Alan Bean to the left and Richard Gordon on the right. They're almost inseparable. I'm just so sorry that Alan's not going to be here this year. But do catch Richard and tell him hi, and enjoy it. Now, the interesting thing about Fred Hayes, you wouldn't believe our meeting. I actually got it on film back in 2013. Fred is right there. What a great guy. He lives in Houston right now. He's going to be out here for Spacefest. The actor that played him in the movie I've never seen, with I can't remember what he was called. It was called Apollo 13, but I think Ron Howard produced it, and Tom Hanks was acted as Jim Lovell. Well, the actor that played this guy actually died over the summer or over the winter. I can't remember, but I've never seen the movie anyway. But they were getting very close to the moon. All of a sudden, the most mistranslated quote in all of history was said by Fred Hayes. He said, "Houston, we've had a problem." And that got mistranslated many times, and history records something else being said. But if you go back to the original mission tapes, you can actually hear what Fred said. They had anybody that has a cell phone knows what happened here. They lost their charger to their power system to the craft, and so they were losing power. And they were losing power with such speed they could never keep it up long enough to make it home after they flipped around the moon. So first of all, they had to figure out how to even flip around the moon on the right course to send it back to Earth at the right angle on the edge of the Earth for a 5-degree re-entry burn at 25,000 miles an hour. So without power, they were losing heat and everything else, and including life support. So they fortunately had the limb attached, and so 3 people went in and lived in somewhere designed for 2. They powered down the Apollo capsule just like you would power down your iPhone if you're stuck on a mountain but you need it for emergencies for when you get back in range. So they powered it down so it wouldn't use up any more power. Then they went to the limb. The problem is there's too much carbon dioxide with 3 people in there. So instead of deciding to pick straws and figure out who they were going to kill, they designed this thing. Actually, Houston designed it based on things that were already on board. It was a carbon dioxide remover, and it successfully allowed them to stay alive in the limb all the way back to almost their Earth entry point. When that happened, they went back into the command module and powered everything back up, and they had enough power to make it home safely, thank God. Up until we lost Challenger or Columbia, this was probably the closest we've come in space anyway to losing somebody. But a brilliant team on the ground and a really good attitude by the crew helped them. So there they are sending their lifeboat away, and they come in at that 5-degree angle just fine. And the whole world was watching. The whole world was watching. I've cut out most of the great film in here just because of time and space constraints. But here's Apollo 13 coming back in to the landing zone. Great splashdown. And there's Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigart, who later became a congressman in California or in Colorado before he died of cancer. But I've never seen the movie, but what a great one this is. Richard Nixon declared the mission a success, and based on the fact that you have 3 astronauts standing there, I agree. Apollo 14 with the golf club had landed, but Apollo 15 on Mr. Rogers was something we had never seen before. And this just moved me so much. I'm going to talk to Dave Scott about this when I see him in a couple of days. This just moved me so much that I'm not sure who it was that fell, but the other guy said, he says, "Give me a hand, buddy," and the other guy says, "Oh yeah, come, here we go." And it's always good to have that backup plan. And I'm sure probably off film they returned the favor. Apollo 15 was the first one, maybe the second one, I can't remember, that had the lunar rover. And this is not visible in this picture, but it will be on the 16 footage. This is actually just raking. They're not harvesting crops or sowing seeds or anything. They're actually just looking for geology. So these guys just looked for something that's interesting. They kind of dug into the surface and scooped it up and brought it back to Earth for study. These guys are all test pilots, so you got to remember that they're not trained geologists. I mean, I'm sure they've had some amateur training, like I had with astronomy, but they're not really the kind of scientists that we had on 17. And poor Joe Engle, as I said before, was bumped for being a test pilot because they wanted to put a geologist on a real flight to the moon. So he knew I guess he would know best what to pick up and where and what it meant. Those are very heavy spacesuits, but here on the ground on Earth they're almost unbearable. But because the gravity is only 1/6 of what it is here on Earth, it just wasn't so bad, they said. I think the hardest part would be the fact the sunlight side is probably 250 degrees plus, and the shade is probably 250 degrees minus. All the Apollo program astronauts landed actually on the daylight side. I think the one that came closest to a low horizon for Earth was probably 17. That's just because of where they landed. '15 probably had the best easy geography, and here they had the camera that they sent back S-band and KU band back to Houston, and that camera stayed there and filmed the launch of the upper stage of the lunar excursion module. There it goes. Within a couple, I don't know how long, it's back in orbit and mating back up with the Apollo capsule and made it back to Earth. And I just can't say enough great stuff about this guy. He walked on the moon with John Young, and like both of us back in this wonderful year in the early 70s, we weren't near as Christian as we are now, but we sure both enjoyed watching this. He had a better view than I did. And here's the Saturn V taking off on one of the more beautiful launches. There are only going to be 2 more Saturn V launches after this. It'll be 17 and Skylab. And one of those that was not used but was funded and actually built is now in the Kennedy Space Center Museum. It's really a great museum, and I understand probably one at Marshall and a couple of other places too. But it's really taken good shape of that unused one, and I'm always convinced all they got to do is stack it back up and put it on the pad. It'll go. These took off a lot slower than the shuttles did. But talking to astronauts who have flown both, and there's only a few, they said this was a much easier ride, even though it got up to 6 Gs, and the shuttle is trimmed out to 3 Gs. And that's because in the lower stage, the atmosphere, the shuttle really shakes and rattles a lot. You think the thing's going to break apart at any second. This was a real smooth ride, they said. And these guys were just really great on the moon. This is by far my favorite mission, even when I watched it live as a kid. Just the technology just had improved by so much, but at the same time, this was about the time that America lost interest, in Congress and the White House had decided to scuttle 3 planned launches. I guess because the ratings weren't good. I really can't tell, but I still have mixed feelings about whether it was a good idea to stop it or not. But I'm so glad that LRO got out there and discovered more on the cheap than what the whole Apollo program did from being there. That gold you see in the visor is because it's to block radiation from the sun and light. And the astronauts tell me that while they were on the moon, they couldn't see the stars because the shade on the gold was just so bright. What you're seeing is probably a lot lighter than what they were able to see through the visors. And there's John Young doing his Navy salute. I don't know how he's doing. I keep trying to get Spacefest to get him out here. I interviewed him and John Young and Crippen right after Columbia was lost, and that was a very interesting interview, and how different they are as far as how they viewed the space program and the kind of risk you want to take to get up there. And here's Charlie. Salute you back, buddy. Now, this is Charlie filming. John's actually on the rover, giving it a really good test spin. I'm not sure how this did compare to the Corvettes or Camaros of the day, but if you listen to the audio of this, they're just really having a blast up there, as I would be too. In the modern day, what they would do is they would just have like a regular relay back to the main craft. But since this thing did operate over the horizon, beyond line of sight, quite often, you had to follow your tracks back to where the limb was, because you couldn't see it anymore. So they had that antenna up on top that made direct contact with Houston from, or the Deep Space Network anyway, maybe relayed through Australia. But that's why the antenna is pointing back up to Earth all the time. Here goes John. But God knows, I just love Charlie Duke. What a great man he is. And if anything, if there's only one astronaut you have time to meet at Spacefest, make sure you find him and shake his hand, because he's the best one out there, believe me. From the Apollo program, anyway. We got to throw Nicole Stott and Rhea said, and all the other great ones too. But I'm just talking. If you got to meet one, make sure it's Charlie Duke. I could sure use one of those things to get up Car Canyon, believe me. Into the sunset. And here's Apollo 16 making its splashdown. They made a Navy guy out of Charlie Duke yet. One of the most beautiful launches and landings I've seen, and one of the most photogenic missions. Just really enjoyed the whole thing from end to end. Actually, the whole last 3 missions were really great as far as photography and eye candy. I hope they give Charlie a shellback ceremony. I think he landed this one south of the equator. Once again, there is the SH-3s from my United States Navy providing rescue, dropping some frogmen in the water, as they called Navy SEALs back then, and they brought the capsule and the crew back safely. We lost our 17 representation this year, so we're going to skip that and go to Skylab, which was the last launch of the Apollo Saturn V. This is actually didn't have a third stage with fuel in it. They emptied it out and turned a space hab into it. So it was the first version of what you see now with the Mir Space Station or the International Space Station. And it took an awful lot of rocket to get something that big up there. So that whole top part there is actually the Skylab itself. What happened was they had a problem with deploying one of the solar arrays, or maybe both of them, or all 4. I can't remember what happened. And they blew out part of the side. Not to the point of losing air pressure inside, but what happened was they didn't have a capability to produce enough power for life support or heat. Or maybe I should say cooling, because up there, I understand the problem was it was very, very hot once they got inside, and there wasn't enough power to cool it down to what would be normal 72 degrees in space. And so on the next mission, this one here, the first thing they had to do was get up there, do some EVAs, and fix that thing. And also that was their first chance to do eyes on to what the problem was, and they developed a very ingenious plan to fix it. It's one of the most unreported things, I think, in the space program, was how they saved Skylab for use once they got up there. This was Saturn 1B. And I think per square inch, I think probably Skylab had the most room of all, even more than the space station. Well, maybe not. But yeah, they had an awful lot of room up there per person, as you can tell. You just packed it full of experiments and everything, and I just really can't wait to show you my shuttle segment of this special, because it's just so awesome to go watch Cabana go up there with the first Unity module. Made it up with the Russian segment, and next thing you know, you have a space station. And boy, that thing really has grown. But even to this day, you can see things from Cabana's footage that's still up there, and you can recognize it if you look at the new stuff. They've moved a couple modules around here or there over time, but everything's really going well up there. I think this was when they had to go out and fix the. They had to do something to do a sunshade and get that other solar thing working. This has to be on the way back. They really, back in the 70s, they actually had just a lot of the news, what they were doing day to day, and what looked like really high tech back in the 70s. It's not anymore, but it was fantastic technology back then in that day. And here they are burning back into Earth for Skylab 2. Once again, not near with the heat that was coming back from the moon for that Apollo capsule, but you can still see the plasma trail. Once again, Navy to the rescue. So here's Skylab 2 coming in. And if you get a chance to meet Mr. Whites, please do. And we're going to see yet another Navy hero, but he got in the wrong ship and ended up in the Marine Corps. Jack's a great guy. I didn't even know he was on Skylab 3. With Alan Bean was on there too. So once again, we're going to miss him this year. But this view kind of shows you the huge expanse of that third stage of that Apollo 5 that they had transformed into the Skylab. They had a lot of luxuries back then that the modern crew doesn't have, including taking showers. You can't do that in space anymore. But one thing you do see still is all the emphasis on exercise and that kind of thing. And this by far is one of my favorite parts of the Skylab mission. These guys were really masterful. It was Alan Bean and Jack. Jack went on to fly a space shuttle mission that was the only one that landed in White Sands, and I'll cover that in the next part. And this is the very end of the Apollo program. They had one capsule, Saturn S1B. And next thing you know, on another beautiful day, looking down from the top of the vehicle assembly building, getting down the causeway, you're going to see a great launch. Now, you see all these people on the Banana Causeway. For more than half the shuttle program, they allowed us to drive our cars out there. And after 9/11, they shuttled that down and decided to charge $60 to get in, and you had to get ticketed just to fit on the bus. So things really have headed downhill at Kennedy since then, and they know I'm unhappy with it. This is looking from the west, but the Banana Causeway is really a great place to see launches from. That's where I saw Eileen Collins take off from STS-114, plus many other launches. But I'm flying out on the across the river over in Broward Park. That was Admiral Dick Truly, who actually went on later to fly his own mission. And there's the last staging of a Saturn in world history. And they had attached this thing behind the third stage, I guess, and it contained this module, which is like the PMM that they use now on the shuttle, or the mirror, or anything else that's connecting to the space station. Is they have this little adapter they put on there, and it allows for two countries to meet. In this case, the countries were the Soviet Union and America. And the Soyuz had actually taken off. It hasn't changed much since then. It's not a really very impressive craft, but hey, it's still flying. They came on and saw this advanced American technology, and I understand we're just blown away. But Vance Brand is a great guy. This was when the United States and the Soviet Union were having a lot of problems, and this was really instrumental. And you got a lot of guys at NASA that learned Russian and vice versa from Roscosmos or whatever it was called back then. And when they separated from each other after a lot of pomp and circumstance and actually true friendship, according to Vance, they got a lot of great pictures of the others. The green Soyuz, it always reminded me of what the inspiration was behind the Star Trek Klingon vessel. And you can see the changes in the Apollo there, because that module's still attached to the front that it connected to. And that was taken up by Apollo, but it was discarded. I don't know if it's in the film or not, but it was discarded before re-entry, as was the service module. From all the pictures you ever see of Apollo's capsule, it looks like some kind of a metallic chrome. But once you see it up close, you see there's a lot of very detailed honeycomb design in it. And so it's a lot more sophisticated and detailed than you think. And here it comes in for the last time on 3 mains. Once again, Navy to the rescue, another SH-3. And here's the end of the Apollo program. Now, this guy named Cy comes out to Spacefest a lot, and he apparently was a big wig at it. He was like Mike Limbacher for the shuttle program. So he's a big wig at NASA. And there they come out for the very last time. And that would end Apollo. Thanks you guys very much for watching. We're going to continue this in part 3. We're going to dive right into the shuttle program.